If you've ever felt anxious, empty, or stuck, even though your life looks completely fine, this story is about you. The apartment was perfect. That was the problem. Ethan sat on his couch at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, surrounded by everything a person could want. The temperature was exactly right. Not too warm, not too cold. His phone rested on the cushion beside him, full of messages he hadn't answered. The refrigerator was stocked with food he hadn't cooked. The television played something he wasn't watching. Outside the window, the city glowed with a million quiet lights. And Ethan felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, not even boredom exactly. Just a soft gray emptiness. Like a sound that had slowly faded until you couldn't quite hear it anymore. He was 37 years old. He had built a good career in digital marketing that paid him well. He had a clean apartment in a city that offered everything. He could order any food he wanted in 20 minutes. He could watch any film, listen to any song, read any article, all without moving from this couch. He had engineered the perfect life, and something in that perfect life was slowly killing him. He just didn't know why yet. The anxiety had started about a year before. That's what his doctor called it. Anxiety. A low, constant hum of worry that never quite stopped. Some mornings, Ethan woke up with his heart already racing before he'd even checked his phone. He was not worried about anything specific. His job was fine, his health was fine, his life by every measure was fine. But fine had started to feel like its own kind of failure. He had tried everything. Better sleep apps, guided meditations on his phone, a new gym membership he used twice, a cleaner diet for 3 weeks, weekend trips to places he photographed more than he actually saw. He bought things, upgraded things, optimized things. Nothing helped. And there was a question that kept knocking softly at the back of his mind late at night in the still apartment. A question he hadn't quite been able to answer. What if comfort is not the solution? What if it's the cause? He didn't know what that meant yet, but that question was going to take him somewhere very far from this couch. It began with a conversation. Ethan had a friend, an older man named Marcus, a former wilderness guide who now worked as a physical trainer. Marcus was the kind of person who seemed to have been built by the outdoors. His hands were rough and steady. His eyes were calm, the kind of calm that came from years of knowing how to be in hard places. He rarely looked at his phone. They met for coffee one morning, and Ethan, without planning to, said the words out loud for the first time. I feel like I'm disappearing, he said. Every day is comfortable, nothing is hard, and I feel worse than I ever have. Marcus looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Then he said quietly, when was the last time you were truly uncomfortable? Ethan thought about it, really thought about it. Not mildly annoyed, truly uncomfortable. Physically cold, genuinely hungry, actually exhausted from real effort. He couldn't remember. That, Marcus said, might be your answer. Ethan shook his head. How can comfort be the problem? Isn't comfort the goal? Isn't an easy, safe life what everyone is working toward? Marcus smiled, not unkindly. Your body and your mind, he said, were shaped by thousands of years of hardship. Your ancestors walked for hours every day. They were cold, they were hungry. They worked hard with their hands and their legs. They sat with silence and with boredom. They earned every meal. Then, in the last 100 years or so, almost all of that disappeared. Everything became easy. Everything became instant. And our bodies and our minds, they haven't caught up. They were built for challenge. When the challenge disappears, something inside us slowly breaks. Ethan stared at his coffee. We have made life so comfortable, Marcus continued, that we have accidentally made ourselves miserable. That conversation stayed with Ethan for weeks. He started noticing things he had never paid attention to before. He noticed how he never felt truly hungry. He ate by the clock, by habit, by boredom, long before his body actually needed food. He noticed how he always had music or a podcast playing, filling every quiet moment, as if silence itself were something dangerous. He noticed how his apartment was always exactly the same temperature, winter and summer. His body never experiencing real cold and never having to work to stay warm. He had, without realizing it, removed every small difficulty from his life. And in doing so, he had also removed something else. Something he couldn't quite name yet. A sense of aliveness. A sense that the things he did each day actually mattered. He began to research. He read about something scientists called the default mode network, a part of the brain that becomes active when you are doing nothing, when you are quiet, when you are not consuming information, not scrolling, not listening. Researchers had found that this brain state was deeply important, that it was where creativity lived, where the mind made sense of itself, where problems got quietly solved beneath the surface. It was where real thinking happened. But in a world of constant stimulation, phones and screens and noise filling every second, this part of the brain almost never got the chance to work. It was like a muscle that was never used. And over time, without use, it weakened. Ethan thought about how rarely he sat in true silence. He was afraid of it, he realized. Silence felt like a room where his worries lived. But what if silence was not the enemy? What if boredom, real uncomfortable boredom, was actually something the mind needed? What if all the noise he surrounded himself with was not protecting him from anything, but was instead slowly taking something away? He started small. He stopped listening to podcasts on his morning walk. Just nothing. The sounds of the street, his own footsteps, the strange discomfort of his own thoughts with nowhere to run. The first week was genuinely hard. His mind was restless and noisy. He kept reaching for his phone and then stopping himself. He felt an almost physical urge to fill the silence with anything at all. But around the 9th or 10th day, something shifted. He noticed a bird he had never seen before sitting on a branch above the path. He noticed the smell of rain on pavement, a smell that had always been there, that he had walked through 1,000 times, but which he had never once stopped to register. He noticed that his breathing was slower, his shoulders were lower. Some tight, unnamed thing in his chest had loosened a little. The silence was working, but something told Ethan that this was only the beginning, that something larger was being asked of him. He was right. It was Marcus who told him about the expedition. Every year, Marcus led a small group of people into a remote wilderness, mountains and rivers and dense forest. No roads, no phone signal, no stores, nothing. They carried everything they needed on their backs. They hunted for their food. They slept in cold weather. They walked for 10, 12, sometimes 15 miles each day, carrying heavy packs. It was by every modern definition deeply uncomfortable. There was a word Marcus used for it. He said the ancient Japanese had a practice called Misogi, a ritual of doing something so difficult, so genuinely challenging, that it had a real chance of defeating you. Not something merely unpleasant, something truly hard. The kind of challenge that forced you to find out who you actually were when comfort was gone. Most people, Marcus said, never found that out. I want to go, Ethan said before he had even finished thinking. Marcus looked at him carefully. It is not a vacation, he said. It is not a camping trip where you sit by a fire and feel peaceful. There will be moments where you hate every part of it, where you want to leave, where you ask yourself why you came. I know, Ethan said. Do you? Marcus asked. Because that is actually the point. The first morning of the expedition was beautiful and brutal at the same time. They flew in by small plane, 6 of them plus Marcus, landing on a gravel strip surrounded by mountains on every side. When the plane left, its engine fading into silence until there was nothing, Ethan stood very still and felt something he had not felt in years. He felt afraid. Not of anything he could name, just the bigness of it, the vast, indifferent emptiness of the wilderness all around him, the complete absence of all the things that usually surrounded him. No signal, no delivery app, no comfortable chair, nothing between him and this place except the pack on his back and the boots on his feet. His body, trained by years of soft and easy living, wanted to panic. But something else, something older, quieter, deeper than his modern habits, said simply, "Stay." They started walking. Within an hour, Ethan's legs were burning. His pack, roughly 40 pounds of gear and food, pressed down on his shoulders with each step. The ground was uneven. Wet grass, loose rock, shallow streams that had to be crossed with boots already soaking through. The sky was gray and heavy, and around midday a cold rain began to fall without apology. He walked, and somewhere in that walking, in that slow, heavy, honest movement, through a landscape that cared nothing about his comfort, something began to release inside him. Something he hadn't known was clenched. The second day brought hunger. Back home, Ethan ate constantly. Meals, snacks, coffee drinks full of sugar, small bites throughout the day, eating before he was hungry and stopping long after he was full. He had not felt genuinely hungry in years. The kind of hunger that arrives like a clear message from your body. You need food, real food, and it matters. Out here, they ate only what they carried and what they found. Meals were simple and small, snacks were limited. There were no extras. By the afternoon of the second day, Ethan was truly hungry for the first time in recent memory. He had expected it to feel like an emergency. His modern brain had been trained to treat any hunger as a problem to be solved immediately. But real hunger, sitting with it, feeling it without immediately fixing it, turned out to be something very different. It was simply information. His body speaking to him clearly in a language he had forgotten how to hear. And when he finally sat down to eat that evening, simple food, warm, beside a low fire while the cold pressed in from the dark around them, it was the best meal he could ever remember eating. Not because the food was good, because he had earned it. He had walked for it. And that made all the difference. On the third night, lying in a sleeping bag while cold air moved through the tent, Ethan could not sleep. He lay there and turned over a question he could not let go of. What had he been protecting himself from all these years? He had spent his entire adult life building comfort. Better apartment, better temperature, faster food, less effort, less waiting, less discomfort, less of everything difficult. But what he was beginning to see, out here cold and tired and more awake than he had felt in years, was that the discomfort was not the enemy. The discomfort was the teacher. Every hard thing he had avoided had also been training that his body and mind never received. Every cold morning he had skipped, every hunger he had immediately silenced, every long walk he had replaced with a ride, every moment of boredom he had filled with a screen. He had thought he was taking care of himself. He had thought he was making smart choices. But he had actually been slowly weakening something, slowly taking away the very experiences that built a person from the inside out. The human body was not designed for ease. It was designed for challenge. It grew stronger under pressure, not just physically, but mentally. Every difficult thing endured built a quiet, real confidence that nothing else could give. A confidence that said, I have been tested and I survived. And every difficult thing avoided built a different thing entirely, a shapeless, unnamed anxiety, a sense that you couldn't quite trust yourself because you had never been asked to. On the fourth day, they hunted. This was the part Ethan had been most uncertain about. He had never hunted. He had spent almost his entire life in cities. The idea of tracking and taking an animal felt remote, uncomfortable, like something from another world. But Marcus had been clear. The hunt was not about sport, not about dominance. It was about something much older. About being honest about where food actually came from. About participating in the real cycle of things the way human beings had participated in it for thousands of years before that connection was quietly removed and replaced with plastic packaging and refrigerated shelves. They tracked a caribou through a long valley for most of the morning, moving slowly and silently in cold wind that made Ethan's eyes water. He carried his pack. His legs ached. He was cold and hungry and present in a way he could never quite manage behind a desk. And then, in a clearing beside a frozen stream, he saw it. The caribou stood still, enormous and calm, its breath rising in white clouds in the cold morning air. Something about that moment, the silence, the cold, the weight of everything it had taken to get here to this exact spot, made Ethan think about something he almost never thought about. Death. His own death. He was 37 years old. In a world of comfort and medicine and safety, it was very easy to forget that he would die. Not someday in some abstract future, but actually, genuinely, at some point, his life would end. And between now and that ending, what had he done? What had he actually lived? He had been comfortable. He had been safe. He had managed risk and avoided difficulty and engineered ease. And the result, the strange and unexpected result, was that he had also avoided the very experiences that made a life feel worth something. The hard things, the real things, the things you could not photograph or order or optimize. Standing in that clearing, cold and tired, and more awake than he had felt in years, Ethan felt something that was not sadness. It was closer to clarity. And here is the question that settled inside him and would not leave for a long time afterward. If you knew right now that your life was half over, would the first half have been enough? That evening, around the fire, Marcus spoke quietly. He talked about ancient people, Hunters and gatherers who walked many miles each day, who knew cold and heat and genuine effort, who felt true hunger and true exhaustion and true rest, and who, as far as modern science could tell, were not more miserable than people today. In many ways, they were mentally stronger, less anxious, more present, not because suffering was good, but because challenge is what the human body and mind were built for. Remove the challenge, all of it, systematically over decades, and something in us quietly stops working. The anxiety that had lived in Ethan's chest for a year, that shapeless, unnamed dread, was not a sign that something was broken inside him. It was a signal, a message from a body and a mind that were built for difficulty, finding themselves with nothing difficult to do. Ethan sat very still and listened to the fire. He thought about all the things he had removed from his life in the name of comfort. The walks replaced by rides, the cooking replaced by deliveries, the silence replaced by noise, the boredom replaced by screens, the patience replaced by instant everything. Each one, by itself, seemed like progress. Together, they had built a very comfortable prison. Day 6 brought a storm. They were crossing a high ridge when the weather changed fast, cold, heavy, and serious. Wind that leaned against you, rain that became sleet, visibility that dropped until Ethan could only see the person a few steps ahead. They had to make camp quickly, with cold hands and gear that was already soaking. It took 2 hours. 2 hours of sustained, real difficulty. There was nothing comfortable about any of it. His hands shook, his boots were wet through. The wind pushed against the shelter as they built it, as if it were testing whether they deserved to stay. But they built it. And when it was done, when the shelter stood, and there was warmth inside and the wind raged outside, but they were safe, Ethan sat down on the floor and felt something rise slowly in his chest. It took him a moment to name it. Pride. Not the shallow, easy pride of buying something or finishing a simple task. Real pride. The kind that lives in the body. The kind that comes from discovering, through actual experience, that when things were hard, genuinely hard, you did not collapse. You did not disappear. You stayed and you worked and you got through it. He had never felt that feeling behind a desk. He had never felt it on a couch. You could not find it there. It only lived on the other side of difficulty. On the last night, Ethan sat alone by the dying fire. He could feel his body differently than he had in years. His legs were tired in a way that felt honest. His hands were rough. His face had been burned by wind and sun. He had slept in cold air every night and walked miles every day, and eaten simply and been genuinely tired and genuinely hungry and genuinely challenged. And the anxiety, that low, constant hum that had lived in his chest for a year, was quiet. Not gone, perhaps, but very, very quiet. He thought about home, about his apartment, about the couch, the controlled temperature, the instant food. He would go back to all of it. That was not the point. The point was something different. He had spent years building a life optimized for ease, and ease was fine in reasonable amounts. But he had gone too far. He had removed every challenge, every moment of genuine effort, every chance to be tested, and then could not understand why he felt empty, why he felt like something was missing. Because something was missing. The hard parts. Ease without challenge produces nothing. No growth. No real confidence, no deep satisfaction. Only a kind of soft, shapeless tiredness that no amount of comfort can fix. He had been trying to fill that emptiness with more comfort, and it had made the emptiness worse because the emptiness was not caused by a lack of comfort. It was caused by too much of it. He came home to his apartment on a Thursday evening, 10 days after he had left. Nothing had changed. The couch was still there. The phone still buzzed with messages. The refrigerator was full. The temperature was exactly right. But Ethan was different. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way he could easily hand to someone else as a formula or a plan. He couldn't bottle what he had found out there. He couldn't explain it in a message. But he could feel it. He began making quiet changes. Not dramatic ones. Not punishing ones. He started walking more, sometimes carrying a weighted pack just to feel the honest effort in his legs and his back. Sometimes just walking, slowly, in silence, in the simple company of his own thoughts. He began changing his relationship with hunger. Not a diet, something simpler. He let himself feel actually hungry before eating. He ate simpler food and ate it slowly and noticed, for the first time in a long time, what it felt like to be genuinely satisfied rather than just full. He began sitting with silence, with boredom, without reaching for his phone the moment things got quiet. He discovered that the silence he had always run from was actually a space, and that real, interesting things lived in that space once he stopped being afraid of it. He started doing cold things. A window open in the morning, a shower turned cold at the end. Small, deliberate doses of physical discomfort, just enough to remind his body that it could handle it. And every hard thing he chose, the long walk, the cold, the hunger, the silence, made the anxiety a little quieter. Not because life had become harder, because he had stopped running from the hard parts. And in stopping, he had found something he hadn't known he was missing. The quiet, accumulated knowledge that he was capable of difficulty. That when things were not easy, he would be okay. That knowledge, it turned out, was the one thing comfort could never give him. Months later, Ethan met a colleague for coffee. A man who worked long hours and lived on convenience and optimization, always chasing the next upgrade, the next shortcut, the next thing that would finally make everything easier. "You seem different," the colleague said, studying him. "Better. What changed?" Ethan thought about the clearing in the mountains, the cold hands, the heavy pack, the fire after a long day of walking, the hunger and the meal that followed. The night he lay in a tent and thought clearly about his own life for the first time in years. "I stopped trying to make everything comfortable," he said. The colleague frowned. "But isn't that the point? Being comfortable?" Ethan picked up his coffee cup. "That," he said, "is what I used to think." And here is the quiet, strange truth that the wilderness had given Ethan, not through telling, but through experience. Modern life had become almost perfectly designed to remove difficulty from cold, from hunger, from boredom, from silence, from real physical effort, from the kind of challenge that human beings had always had until very recently, without even trying. And in that removal, something essential had been lost. Not a small thing. The anxiety, the emptiness, the sense that life was moving past without meaning. These were not signs of personal failure. They were signals from a body and a mind built for challenge, suddenly placed in a world without any. The cure was not more comfort. The cure was less, not dramatically less, not in a punishing way, but deliberately, regularly, intentionally less. Allowing some cold in, some hunger, some real effort, some silence, some genuine difficulty that asked something of you and waited to see what you would give. Because every time you met something hard and came through the other side, something in you quietly changed. Something small but real was added to you. A layer of trust in yourself. A tiny piece of evidence that you were more capable than your comfortable life had ever asked you to be. These small layers, added one by one over time, became a kind of armor, not against the world, against the unnamed anxiety that grew whenever a person lived too softly for too long. The wilderness had not fixed Ethan. The cold had not fixed him. The hunger and the long walks and the heavy pack had not fixed him. But they had reminded him of something he had forgotten completely. Something that no app, no upgrade, no convenience, no perfectly controlled environment could ever give back. That he was built for more than this. The apartment was exactly the same as it had always been. Ethan stood at the window on a quiet Tuesday night, looking at the city below, the same city that had always been outside this glass. The same million lights, the same comfortable warmth, the same stillness. He was comfortable, he was warm, he was safe, and for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. Not because everything was perfect, not because the emptiness would never return, but because he knew now in a way he had earned rather than read, that comfort was a place to rest, not a place to live. And he knew where the door was.